Shalom, and welcome to Real Israel Productions, the place where Israel's past and present meet. Well, this is where it all started, by the Yam, by the sea. We're standing just outside the city of Ashkelon, on Israel's western coast, due north of Sinai and Mitzrayim. We're not really sure where Kriyat Yamsuf took place. Was it the southern part of the Mediterranean? Was it all the way further south in the Red Sea? Or maybe even by one of the large lakes between Mitzrayim and Israel? And that debate will go on. But one thing is for sure, by standing here on a rather cold and rather stormy day, you can really get the feeling what Bnei Yisrael felt like right before Yetziat Mitzrayim. And you can feel maybe what it was like to have the Mitzrayim behind you and have such a sea in front of you and not be sure what was going to happen until a Jew named Nachshon came running down the beach, jumped into the water, and went with the water up to his neck. And Moshe, with his hand outstretched, with that mateh Elohim biyado, saw the waters, maybe the water you see right in front of you, split into two, and Bnei Yisrael walked to Eretz Yisrael. We're not going to continue our story here, but rather we're going to travel due east to a very small and special community called Komemiyut. Join us for the ride. It all started here in the wheat fields surrounding Moshav Komemiyut, in the southern part of Israel, the southern part of the Shvela. This community of Komemiyut is very, very small, but it has a fantastic history about it, which before we head to the matza factory here in Komemiyut, I'd like to tell you the story. You see, this Moshav was settled in 1950, right after the state of Israel was established. Very small, established by like 30 to 50 people. But they came here, all very religious, to build Israel's first completely religious Moshav. They had a problem as soon as they came, because in 1951 it was already the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year. And they couldn't plant the fields. They had decided that they were not going to plant their fields in any way, shape, or form during the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, when you all know it is forbidden from the Torah to plant or to work the fields. In the following year, here in Komemiyut, they came to plant the fields, and they went to buy seed to plant the wheat so that they could make grain to make matza. But they had a problem. You see, all the grain had been planted on the Shemitah year, and all the seeds for the wheat was also from the Shemitah year. They had nowhere to get grain. They went looking all over. Finally, they went to a kibbutz right next door called Kibbutz Gat, named after the famous Plishti city of Gat, which you'll learn about later in the V'im Rishonim. They went there and they said, maybe do you have any seeds that were not used or not grown on the Shemitah year? They said, of course not. Everything here was grown. We found the way to make it grow. They said, well, we can't use it. What are we going to do? They said, well, we have nothing for you. And as they're leaving Kiryat, the kibbutz of Gat, they see on the side in some like old room some sacks of rotten seeds of wheat. So they called the people over from the kibbutz and they said, can we take that grain? Can we take those seeds? They started laughing. They said, no, those are rotten. We're going to throw them away. Nothing will grow from them. They said, well, maybe, you never know. Can we have them? They said, sure. They said, how much does it cost? They laughed at them. They said, you're doing us a favor to take it. Take it for free. Well, they took that grain, and it was rotted seeds, all old and moldy, and they said, this is what we have. And they planted those seeds. Now, everyone else had planted months before, but they had to wait till the Shemitah year was totally finished. So they planted 2 or 3 months after everybody else. But you know what? That year there was no rain. And all the people who had planted early, their seeds were in the ground and they were drying out. But Komemiyut planted their field after Rosh Hashanah. No rain, no rain, no rain. As soon as they finished planting, guess what happened? You're right. A day or 2 after they planted, all of a sudden the skies opened up and it started pouring rain. And from that seed that was rotten, and it was moldy, and it was cracked, everyone laughed at them. Nothing will grow from that. Only their wheat grew that year. Everyone else who had planted earlier, since there was no rain, their seeds dried up and withered, and they had tiny little wheat. But here in Komemiyut, the wheat grew and grew and grew and grew. And no one could believe that from those rotten seeds, such beautiful wheat had grown. That year, right here in this little Moshav of Komemiyut, they had the finest and nicest wheat in the entire country. All a miracle from Hashem. Let's go inside now into the matza factory, which is just to my right, and watch how they can take this wheat and make matzot shel mitzvah. Come along, let's have a look. We're here at the Komemiyut Matzah Factory, probably one of the most famous matzah factories in the world, certainly in Israel. I'm standing now really at step 1, where it's all going to begin in just a couple of moments. To my right and to my left are separate rooms, separated by windows. To my right is the room where the water is kept, the famous Mayim Shalanu, the water that has remained overnight covered and still, ready to be used for the matzah. But it is kept very separate from another room to my left where the flour is kept. In a couple of moments, they're going to start the process, and someone will measure out the flour. On the other side, someone will measure the water. And when they're ready to start that 18 minutes, they'll open the windows, and right here in the middle where I'm standing, they'll begin mixing, kneading, and then behind us, rolling and getting the matzah ready to be baked. Let's have a look. Before we start baking the matzahs, each and every one of the workers must thoroughly wash and completely dry their hands to make sure that there's no dough left on their fingers and that their hands are not wet when they're going to be working with the dough. Their hands are checked. That's the first stage. The second thing that takes place, as you can see from the sign above me, is that each and every worker is reminded to constantly be thinking and even saying, L'shem matzot mitzvah, that the work that they're doing, they're intending that these matzot will be used for the mitzvah of matzah on the Seder night. We're now ready to start. The water and the flour will now come from the different rooms and be mixed together. The person kneading the dough very, very quickly works, and in less than 20 seconds, he kneads together the water and the flour and makes the first log of matzah dough. After the water and flour has been mixed together and kneaded, this big chunk of matzah dough is taken to the next table. Our 18 minutes have begun, so the workers will now work very quickly. The matzah dough is created into one big log, which can then be cut into uniform pieces and sent over to the next table. We now move on to the next table. Here the workers take the pieces of dough which they have been given and will roll them flat into flattened matzah dough.